Thank you. One instrument at a time will be quite sufficient.
You know, I could do it in 4/4 if you prefer it with a disco beat.
Tuesday.
Okay, everyone, a big serious.
Show me a man that's got a good one. Show me. Show me a man out there that's got a good woman. Show me.
Who are your influences?
Led Zeppelin.
Sinead O'Connor.
Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell.
Wings. Black and I'm proud.
Sorry that went off at half-cock, Alan, but...
I've shown that reel in 30 countries. Only in Brussels does it break down.
And also it didn't show some of the very good films. I mean, in the space of less than 30 years, you put together 14 amazing films covering all kinds of genres, from thrillers to musicals, from gritty social dramas to a film like Shoot the Moon, which caught the breath with its angst and its sensitivity. And you began, as did some others of your generation like Hugh Hudson or Ridley Scott, you began in the world of advertising as a copywriter and then as a director of TV spots. Looking back, do you think that was your film school, Alan?
Well, I didn't go to film school. It was, at the time, it was the only place we could do film, really, because the British film industry was terribly depressed. So it was impossibly difficult to get any kind of films made. And I'd come from advertising as a writer. And yeah, I made commercial every week for, 5, 6, 7 years maybe. And so every time, I said action, every time I said cut, I learned something. So in a way, yes, it was my film school. Of course, it doesn't teach you everything because commercial is 30 seconds, 1 minute long. And it's hard to make the change to feature film, because you then have to hold, hour and a half, 2 hours of story in your head.
But the editing is, your films are never boring. And I should think that's a legacy of those years when you had to cut and you could never linger very long.
No, I suppose, polishing every moment was something we learned from commercials, because every second does matter. And so, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd said I was terrified of boring the audience for 1 second, but I think we've got that from commercials, certainly.
Bugsy Malone, which marked your breakthrough in the mid-70s, was one of the final films produced by the Rank organisation, which had been the flagship of British production for decades. How did you set that film up?
Well, it was very hard, because there was only 2 places you could go for money in those days. It was Rank at one end of Wardour Street, and EMI, the company, at the other end. So if you didn't get your money from either place, you didn't make your film. So it was very difficult. But sorry, I'm very distracted. There's somebody talking. Who's talking? Oh, it's the translator. Yeah. A little quieter, please, if you don't mind.
There's a sort of hum in the
thicker
mic.
glass, yes. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot about you lot. So it was hard to get our films made in those days. And, you'd go, on that particular film was an unusual film, because I would go in and I'd say, it's a gangster film and it's pastiche of American musicals, and they would look at me, and then I'd say, and the average age it's all children, average age 12, and then they would say, next. They weren't too keen, but Rank, it's the last film I think the Rank ever made. They were an old British company. They were a disgrace, really, because they owned all the cinemas. They had a distribution company. They had a wonderful studio at Pinewood. They had a laboratory, and yet they made very few films. So it was they were useless, basically. But they did give me the money for the films, thank God.
Then you set up a company with David Putnam fairly soon afterwards, didn't you?
No, we never had a company together, but we made. He helped us get the money for Bugsy Malone, and then he went to a company called Casablanca in Los Angeles, and they had this film. They had a script. It was a book, actually. They gave to me originally called Midnight Express, and then they introduced me to Oliver Stone, who was going to do the screenplay. So Oliver came to London and wrote screenplay in my back office in Soho in London, and then David was one of the producers. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was a film I remember vividly seeing at Cannes at the press conference, the press screening in the morning, and being blown away by it, and was stunned that it didn't win a major award at the festival. I think at that time there was this sort of knee-jerk reaction that there couldn't be any torture in Turkish prisons, and you were a racist and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a thing that I should have put a few people in there who were nice Turks, and maybe I didn't do that. But it went down very well at Cannes. In fact, it was tipped to win, and I came back after showing the film at Cannes. I came back to London, and I had a phone call saying, "Get on the plane, because the word is that you've won the Palme d'Or." So I had 4 very small children at the time, so they all lined up and waved goodbye as I went off to Cannes to get my award. And then when I got to Heathrow, the tannoy thing said, "Alan Parker," and I picked up the phone, and they said, "Don't bother, you haven't won." And so I had to go back home. My kids all were lined up again saying, "Where's our award?" It's most humiliating.
Now, music has been a theme in many of your films, with Fame, Pink Floyd, The Wall, of course, Evita. Do you like directing musical numbers?
It's a very hard genre, very, very difficult to do. It's not all, I've done a lot of very serious films. Unfortunately, because of this thing breaking down, you didn't get to see the serious films, but I have made films like Midnight Express and Mississippi Burning and Birdie and The Life of David Gale, slightly more serious films, and I tried to alternate them. And when I first started you know, film critics like to put you into a pigeonhole of this kind of director or that kind of director. And I really wanted to break that apart, really, in so much as I did Bugsy Malone and then I did Midnight Express, 2 very different films. And so I just tried to do different things each time. The reason being that it's a way of keeping creatively fresh, to try and do different things. So if I did a film with music, I certainly would not do another film with music until I do a more serious film, or I don't think I'm an entirely serious person, so I try to do something that had humor in it. And so I try to alternate the films and do different kinds of films, really. As I say, because it made it more interesting for me. You know, the French have the theory that a director makes 20 versions of the same film throughout their career. And being English, we try to prove the French wrong at any occasion. So, yeah.
Ken Loach makes the same film 20 times.
He does indeed, yes. And the thing about Ken is that he's one of my heroes. He's a wonderful director. But I always say that he's been storming the Winter Palace for 50 years now, but nobody's told him it's an Apple store. Thanks, whoever got that joke.
Now, unlike Ken Loach and unlike Mike Leigh, you decided to take up the challenge of working in Hollywood. What's the essential difference in your experience between working over there and working in London?
Well, to be honest, the essential difference at the time was that we wouldn't have worked at all, because Ken Loach didn't work for 10 years because he refused to go to Hollywood. And the British film industry was at a very low ebb. And so the only place we could go, really, was to Hollywood, where they, you know, welcomed us with open arms. And, you know, and I enjoyed my time there. It's very fashionable to knock that particular industry, but it's been very kind to me, and I was able to make films with European sensibility, but I made them in the United States, which is makes it easier when you try to get the film distributed, because they do dominate the world's distribution system. And so it means that your film will be seen in 40 countries. So that part of it was good. And I was able to make individual films. They didn't really interfere until, you know, very recently. They pretty well gave you a free hand. In the last decade, that has completely changed. And so it's very hard for filmmakers to make individual personal films anymore there.
But there was one film which, in a way, is neither one nor t'other, and that is Evita, in that you had to shoot in Buenos Aires, you had to shoot in Budapest. It was an immense undertaking. You wrote, or you published a book at the time, which I recently looked at again, and it was an incredible story, an incredible shoot, all the challenges you had, really, to overcome. And also dealing with, working with Andrew Lloyd Webber and of course, and getting that new number written and approved. Didn't he write a new extra number which wasn't in the musical?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, I needed 70 changes from the stage show, and yeah, can you imagine working with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Madonna? God, I must have been mad. But it wasn't easy, no. The new, yeah, he did. Finally, he wrote a new song with Tim Rice. Tim Rice and he hadn't worked together for some time, so that was a bit hard getting the new song. And then they wrote the new song, and then it won the Oscar for Best Song.
Now, you began as a writer, and I think soon after Bugsy Malone came out, you did a kind of novelization, is a bad word for it, but you did a book, didn't you, of the film, which was then quite successful. I think it was sold in bookshops and so on.
Like most books are.
Yeah, the script. How important is a script for you? And you've written all your own, haven't you?
It's everything, really. I mean, to start with, because I'm a writer, I thought of myself as a writer before I was a director, and to be a director is much tougher than being a writer. I mean, I've done both jobs, and believe me, the director's job is much harder, and by far and away the most important person in any creative endeavour to do with the audio-visual field. And yeah, so I suppose it's always handy to be, you know, to know that I can write. I mean, one of the things about making films is that it's very hard work. You know, in America you work a 12-hour shooting day and a 6-day week. And if you're the director who also writes, then, you know, my day off is usually spent rewriting a scene ready for the next week. There's always something that needs changing or tweaking or whatever. So, yeah, it's pretty hard. Physically very difficult job.
Did you also act as your own producer for most of your films?
I have. I mean, I think I've had very good producers, partners, you know, line producers, the people who do the actual work. As you know, on any film, there's always like 20 people who call themselves producer. And, you know, I've always said, you know, I think on the commitments I had, 14 people called themselves producer. I don't think I met half of them. And, you know, and they were all very nice, or nearly nice, you know, but I always say that 14 producers who are 10% difficult and 90% nice adds up to one producer who can be a complete and utter, I won't say the word, but it begins with A. But, you know, producing for me, to be called the producer, is to do with the fact that mostly it's me who's secured the finance for the film, mostly when it's been an easy film to finance, i.e. one American studio involved. The hardest films to do are, you know, as many European films are, you just stitch together lots of different money from lots of different places, which is very hard work to find that kind of money to put together a film. But for me to be the producer as well as the director and the writer is to do with control. It's to do with being able to, as I say, to be able to make a film which the director primarily is in control of, and therefore get little interference from people like producers.
You mentioned Mississippi Burning, which I'm sure is on Donald Trump's favorite film list, but you know, it was a film at the time which really, it was a savage indictment of the Ku Klux Klan and how it was still going on until, you know, and still probably is. But I mean, did you have any problems when you were shooting that film? Did we have any threats? Or?
No, I mean, Mississippi Burning, we were told it was going to be difficult when we arrived in Mississippi, but the governor, who happened to be black, was incredibly helpful to us. So, you know, we obviously had security precautions, and there were probably a few crazy people who might have wished us harm, but mostly it was okay. It was more difficult doing Evita in Buenos Aires. When I arrived there, every bridge that you went under said in Spanish said "Go home, Madonna," and Alan Parker, and which is not very welcoming when you're coming from the airport. But that was kind of more scary, because the reason being that Eva Perón is obviously, you know, half the people in Argentina think that she's a saint and the other half think that she's quite the opposite. But Mississippi Burning, ultimately, I think, you know, things have moved on, you know, from the story was set in the 60s, and Mississippi had really quite seriously changed in many ways.
You're particularly good at directing actors, Alan, and three of them, John Hurt and Frances McDormand and Gene Hackman, all received Oscar nominations under your direction. Do you spend a lot of time in rehearsal with your actors? Do you spend a lot of time ahead of the shoot, meeting them and talking?
No, the truth is that in an American movie, very rarely do you have the luxury of rehearsal. Some films make allowances so that you can have a week or two. But in the main, most American films, you cast them and the people turn up, you know, and there's good and bad, you know. If you over-rehearse, you ends up being theatre, and you're filming theatre. And the great thing about film often is that there is the spontaneity of the moment where people aren't that prepared, and mostly in American movies you have very little, and mostly in any films anywhere really, you have, because the shooting time is so brief most of the time, you have very little opportunity for rehearsal. And it's sometimes quite embarrassing. I mean, sometimes if you're doing a love scene, I've done love scenes where, you see there's the actress and then the man, and you say to the actress, "Oh, you haven't met Jimmy, have you? Jimmy is," and then they both take their robes off, and then they get into bed and make love. You know, that's the kind of, you know, not a lot of rehearsal.
What about improvisation?
Great deal of improvisation, yes.
You're very much at home, or you were at home, with gritty urban subjects in Ireland for The Commitments and Angela's Ashes, for example. Angela's Ashes particularly left a deep impression on me because it really conjured up that childhood of Frank McCourt and what it must have been like to grow up in the slum area and with all the pressures of the time. Do you spend a lot of time in research for that, or do you go straight from the novel?
No, well, the novel is beautifully written and very detailed in its writing. So there's, you know, just reading that, all the clues are there, really. But of course, you know, with every film, particularly if it's a period film, I did an enormous amount of research before going into it. But the truth is that the book itself was, you know, it was #1 bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list for, you know, 2 years. It's a phenomenal piece of writing in the detail of the writing. So as I say, all the clues are there. The great problem with making a feature film of a book like that is that, you know, I have to make a feature film that lasts 2 hours approximately, and that story, you know, you could have done on Netflix for, you know, 20 episodes. So making a film is kind of a different kind of discipline.
Were you tempted to do TV series, actually, at one point?
Not really. In the days when I wanted to make films, which I don't anymore as I'm retired, the feature film to me was the way in which to see films in a cinema, sharing the experience with the audience on a big screen with wonderful sound, is the ultimate experience. There's nothing to compare with it. You watch a film on an iPad or an iPhone is just so disheartening, really. And you can't rely on the digital process, as we found out at the beginning of this talk. And but to watch a film with an audience and to see it beautifully projected with great sound, no one's ever bettered that experience. Doesn't matter how good your home sound system and projection system is, it never matches that.
One of the most subtle films in your career, I think, is Birdie, in which Nicolas Cage had a surprisingly good part. I mean, he was really restrained and very good. And Matthew Modine, they were excellent. And there was a shadow of the Vietnam War, as I recall, over that film. Was that an original script, or was it based on a novel?
It was based on a novel, actually, which was actually about the aftermath. The two main characters in the film is about the aftermath of the Second World War. Yeah. And we moved it to the Vietnam, to be after the Vietnam War, because at that moment in time when we made the film, it made it more relevant, really, to the audience. And so, but it began life as a novel. Then it was sent to me as a particular screenplay, and then I worked on that particular screenplay. So it had a natural evolution, really.
And have you ever acquired a property yourself, a novel which you believe in tremendously, and actually never wound up making it?
I've written a few, a few novels that I didn't make as movies, but not really. I've done, yes, I have. You know, for a long, long time, for 20-odd years or so, I used to get the question, do you have that screenplay in the drawer, that you never got to make, and I never really did, because I was lucky to make almost everything that I had developed. But yeah, I have written maybe 4 films, 5 films that I didn't make the film of them. And I always say when you're writing a film, it's a bit like directing, only you don't have the camera there, and you don't have to work a 6-day week. And so I've finished these films in my head, 5 films, which no one's ever seen but me. I said I could have I've got so many now, I could have a whole film festival in my head, but it's, I don't, you think I would like to have made that as a movie, perhaps, but, it passes really, because you put so much energy into trying to get films made, and you know you can work on a film, and it's really the most difficult thing in the world to get film financed, and it's a very debilitating experience to do it. And one of the reasons that I stopped making movies was because of that. It wasn't. I used to love the camaraderie of the film set. I used to love writing films, but you know, trying to get the money is. I always, you know, I had a metaphor the other day, which was near where I live. If I go to get money out of the cash machine, there's always this guy who sits there and begging, and he always has a dog in his lap. And I thought, that's exactly me. And I'm in the outer office of some studio executive in Hollywood, and I've got, instead of the dog in my lap, I've got my script in my lap, you know. And then you go and you have to beg for the money, and there comes a point in your life when you're too old to do that.
But you filled the gap by going back to painting, and I think you paint every day, don't you?
I do, yeah. I was very fortunate in that when I did probably retire quite early, but I wanted to do it on my terms. You know, Michael Caine says, you know, you don't retire from the film industry, the film industry retires you. I am of the opinion that, you know, filmmaking is not for old men, mostly because it is so hard. The intensity of being a director, which is, because it is the most important job and the hardest job on a film, is... it's just, it can, you know, as you get older, it becomes that much more difficult. I never used to have a director's chair. You know, you see these photographs of Alfred Hitchcock, and he's always sitting in a chair, and I never had a chair because I was always pacing up and down, you know, and on the commitments I had a bentwood chair like you get in a restaurant, you know, and every day, without me knowing it, the prop men used to saw half an inch off the bottom of the chair, and so day by day the chair got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and no, I forget what the question was now. What was the question?
Wasn't a question.
I don't know.
A statement, I think.
Okay. It's hard making movies, yeah.
And right at the beginning, I said that you've worked in so many genres, and I think somewhere you mentioned that Fred Zinnemann was someone you admired very much when you were young, and he was a director who worked in many genres too, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, Fred was very kind to me. He was kind of a mentor, really. I always used to show him my films first when I'd finished them, and he was mostly very complimentary, you know, but he was a very tough old Fred, and sometimes he was not so complimentary on the films. He said an interesting thing, that he said, being a film director is an incredible privilege. Don't waste it. And by that he meant that, you know, film, you know, is too perhaps important in his eyes and his values and his taste and a particular period of time, not to make, you know, spectacular blockbuster type movies filled with digital effects. It isn't something that interests me, and I never thought he died, so I could have got on with it without him knowing, but he probably looking up there, looking down, you know.
Did you see his films very early in life, or...?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think that...
The Nun's Story.
With, I think more the High Noon and From Here to Eternity, films that influenced me when I was, before I became a director.
And were you impressed by the French New Wave too?
Probably, in some of the energy that came from it. I came to it quite late, I have to say. You know, I was never really a film student as such. So the work, the New Wave had probably come and gone by the time I started making movies. But no, I came from my own New Wave, really, which was different kind of directors in a different period of time. So we made movies differently.
And yet, was that crucial 10 years later than the Carol Rice, Tony Richardson, John Schlesinger generation of kitchen sink type British realism?
Well, yeah, there was a big gap, you know. I mean, in that, you know, as I've mentioned before, there was a big depression in the British film industry, where hardly anything got made, and only things that got made were rubbish like the Rank organisation made, like Carry On films. So to make serious films was actually quite difficult at that period of time. And if there was anything any good being made, it was by people like Ken Loach, who didn't work in film as much as work on television.
Television, yeah. Or theatre. I mean, British theatre was healthier than British film for many years.
Well, theatre has always been there, yeah, absolutely.
You've addressed social issues in your work, but you never do it with a doctrinaire approach. In films like, Shoot the Moon or The Commitments, there is that social issue below it, but it's not in your face. You don't. It's there in the background. It's like a baseline in a way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of critics have thought them to be too, in your face. Some film like Midnight Express or Mississippi Burning, but no, I think in the end, I'm a filmmaker. The hardest film to make for a director is one that has creative integrity, but also reaches a wide audience. It's very easy to make a film for your 6 closest relatives or for some cinematheque. It's much more difficult to make a fantastically good film that actually also can reach a very large audience. Got a message?
Yeah. Oh yes, he's saying, would you like to show the video at the end? Would you like to show the whole thing?
Do you want to see it or not?
Okay. Well, actually, then in that case, it's perfect timing, because my final question was going to be about your work. Well, you were here yesterday and today also in your capacity as the Honorary President of FERA, which I will translate as the Federation of European Film Directors. Could you tell us about your role there?
Well, I'm very pleased to do it, because all my life I've been involved with directors' rights, and they very kindly asked me to be the honorary president. I do very little work, I'd like to point out, so I'm probably a terrible president. But I absolutely believe in what they stand for. I mean, I know this week they've been discussing this whole new digital landscape which we have ahead of us, and it always amuses me as a filmmaker, with the internet and everything, is that it's fantastic that it gets to so many people. And the incredible thing is that it generates so much money. I'm sure that man who did Angry Birds is terribly rich and everything. But if there's so much money involved in this, why are film directors so poor? Because we don't benefit at all. They did in the United Kingdom, they just did a huge, very comprehensive study of film directors, and the average annual amount of money that a film director makes is the same as a bus driver. And so the whole notion of everything being free is no good, because in the end, the directors will go broke and won't be able to do the creative work that everybody craves to see. That's right. And so if you kill the creative people by not protecting them with regards to copyright, which is the European Union were at the forefront of that, and then they've decided to do it somewhat differently. And that's madness, because if you don't protect particular people like creative people, writers, and in particular directors, if you don't protect them with regards to copyright, there won't be any work to see. So it might be free, but there won't be anything there. And so you can't do it that way, in my regard, my way of thinking. So anyway, I'm going to shut up, and maybe you should see the showreel.
But Alan, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
For this. Thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for coming over. Do you want to go down? Yeah.
Your name Robinson? You work with Fat Sam?
Anybody who is, anybody will soon walk through that door at Fat Sam's Grand Slam Speakeasy.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Bugsy Malone. Don't call us. We'll call you.
The next group of musicians can go to the 5th floor now, please.
To my talent. Thank you. One instrument at a time will be quite sufficient.
You know, I could do it in 4/4 if you prefer it with a disco beat.
Baby, look at me and tell me what you see. You ain't seen the best of me yet. Don't you know who I am? Remember my name.
Fame, I'm gonna live till Tuesday. Okay, everyone, big serious.
Show me a man that's got a good one. Show me. Show me a man out there who's got a good woman. Show me.
Who are your influences?
Led Zeppelin.
Sinead O'Connor.
Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell.
Wings.
Nowhere to run to, baby. Nowhere to hide.
When I look in the mirror, comb my hair, I see your face just smiling there, yeah.
I'm black and I'm proud.
I'm sick and tired of going to the funerals of black men who have been murdered by white men.
They are powerless against us if every single Anglo-Saxon Christian one of us stands together.
You got a stupid smile, you know that, pal? Can you see it? Huh? Go ahead. You smile when the bulldozer ran over the black kid's body? Get here! Get here! Did you smile when the bodies were covered over? Get here! Get here! Get up here. Come on. Get here. Did you smile that same stupid smile? Huh? Did you? You.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'm afraid.
You know, some religions think that the egg is the symbol of the soul. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
No one who looks through that glass sees a person, they see a crime. I'm not David Gale. I'm a murderer and a rapist, 4 days shy of his execution.
You might be poor, your shoes might be broken, but your mind is a palace.
Don't worry, Birdie, they can't make me leave you. They got the best of us, Birdie. We're both totally screwed up.
could have been anything that we wanted to be. Yes, that decision is ours. It's been decided where we could divide it. Let friendship go of our powers. You give a little love and it all comes back to you.
And then Dr. Campbell came in and held my hand. It was then that I knew I was going to get better.
Look, you know who I am?
No, I don't know, and I don't care.
Well, you should know, all right? Because it's my film. Film, okay? So buzz off. You're getting on my bloody nerves.